Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I am Zeckthar,
And I'm Yuksen.
and we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st Millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this week we will be looking into the most noble of the Space Marine chapters, the Salamanders.
Right you are, brother. The Salamanders, a beacon of hope in such a dark universe. The protectors of mankind, and, quite honestly, the guys in a galaxy of horrors and corruption. They are the benevolent guardians of humanity, where every child is precious to them, and no sacrifice is too great to save a single human's life.
I couldn't say it better myself, Yuksen. Well, let's dig in, shall we? Well, Yuksen, this week I think it is important to show how the Salamanders vastly differ from their brother Astartes, which I honestly think starts with their Primarch Vulcan.
Indeed, Zeckthar. Like all Space Marines, the Salamanders follow their father's example. I think we covered Vulcan's character pretty well last week, and the Salamanders follow his example to a T.
Quite right, Yuksen. Above all others, the Salamanders remain the most human of the Astartes. In fact, they alone continue to stay close with their original families on Nocturne. This is done to remind them what they fight for, and gives them the compassion that most other legions lack. While they may show more empathy than other Space Marines, don't for a second think they are pushovers. If anything, this has built into them a stubbornness that at times borders on suicidal. If you need to hold the line, none will do it better than a unit of Salamanders.
While that is all true, it wasn't until they met up with Vulcan that they learned patience and the tactics they needed to survive. Before Vulcan, they were simply known as the Dragon Warriors, and their most noble work was the assault on the Tempest Galleries during the Unification Wars. Now, the Unification Wars were the time that the Emperor of Mankind united ancient Terra under his control in the late 30th millennium. The Caucasus Wastes was a techno-barbarian state located in the Caucasus Peninsula of the ancient European continent on Old Earth. Its despotic ruler, known as the Ethnarch of the Caucasus Wastes, was defeated by forces of the Emperor and imprisoned in the maximum security imperial prison in the Himalayan mountains known as Kangba Marwu, or the Vault. The primary imperial force responsible for this outcome was the early 18th Legion of Space Marines, later known to history as the Salamanders.
Yes, we know all this, Yuksen, but what was the battle the Salamanders were part of?
Well, they were part of the last battle of the conquest of the Caucasus Wastes, and one of the final battles of the Unification Wars that would see at least the Emperor as the undisputed master of Terra, but victory would not prove easy. Those who ruled the Caucasus Wastes presented the Emperor's forces with one of the most difficult challenges they faced in open warfare. The Caucasus Ethnarchy's power was based mainly on scores of relic technologies and the terrible weapons in their possession, which dated back to before the Age of Strife, while its military forces ranged from the armored, gene-augmented Urkasis troops, which were, roughly, the strength of the Emperor's old Thunder Warriors.
Ah, yes, the Thunder Warriors. They were actually quite interesting. They are the predecessors of the Astartes, dating back to...
Yes, they were, but we don't have time for that.
Fair enough.
Getting back to our story, the Ethnarchy's strongholds were concealed deep beneath the hollowed-out mountains of the wastes and shielded from aerial attack by near-impregnable power webs. An attempt by the Imperial forces to take Ethnarchy's mountain strongholds by the storm earlier in the Unification Wars had met with bloody defeat, with the loss of almost 10,000 Thunder Warriors and more than 1 million other casualties, but had seen the Caucasus Wastes contained and isolated thereafter. So it was that when the hour of the Emperor's vengeance came around, nothing was to be left to chance. The forces of 6 entire proto-legions of the Astartes were mustered for the final assault on the Caucasus Wastes, with the Emperor himself to lead them, and countless other tributary armies beneath the Raptor and Lightning banner of the Unification. But of all of these, the first thrust upon which all else would depend, the Emperor trusted to the promising 18th Legion. Although the decision to utilize what they considered to be a largely unknown and untested unit in such a vital role was questioned by many with the Imperial command. Yet, the Emperor's will was obeyed. The 18th would carry the assault, utilizing scores of freshly created termite subterranean boring machines fitted with recently acquired technology from Mars. The full force of the Proto-Legion, some 20,000 Astartes strong at this juncture, was committed to what was widely believed to be a suicide mission to destroy the vast geothermal furnaces which provided power for the Ethnarchy's impregnable defenses. These were housed far below even the subterranean strongholds and known only through ancient legend, in a 100-kilometer-long string of vast artificially created caverns known as the Tempest Galleries for the incessant storms of flame and electromagnetic force which bled from the ancient and little understood relic machineries.
Uh-huh. That's where they got the name for the battle. Ah, I see. Real quick, Yuksen, do you know why they call it a gallery?
No clue.
Me neither. I've always kind of wondered about that. But sorry, carry on with your chronicles.
Or galleries. It doesn't make sense. Plural or singular.
I mean, normally you think of like art on walls or statues or something. But sorry, carry on, Yuksen.
Or a ship or something. I don't know. No, that's galley.
No, that's a galley. Sorry, carry on.
Once they were ready, the 18th saluted the Emperor and calmly mounted the untested Martian war engines and pierced the dark earth and rock at the edges of the wastes, disappearing into a deadly and unknown world.
Real quick, I have to stop you again, Yuksen. I just noticed this and find it kind of interesting. So, the whole plan the Emperor has, anyways, is hinged on a unit that's never been proven in combat, that are boarding machines that have never been used before.
And claiming that this is not taking any chances. Yeah.
Well, if it was anybody other than the Salamanders, I'd be like, this ain't going to work, Chief.
Well, hence why many of them were going, this doesn't make sense.
This isn't good. Let's try something different. Sorry, I just noticed that. I was like, well, wait a minute. I mean, if anybody did that today anyways, we'd all think that they were nuts. Actually, now I think about it, it did happen in Terran 42, D-Day -5, the whole giant paratroop dropping of the 101st. That tactics had never actually really been used in combat before. And it kind of worked. It wasn't the... Oh, we could go into that later. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Soon, all signals were lost, and not even the power of the Imperial Psychers could penetrate the turbulent depths to maintain contact with the Space Marine assault forces. Hours stretched into days, and days became weeks, and nothing was heard from the assault force, while the vast army of the Emperor waited in immediate readiness for the grand attack, and no sign or signal came. Pressed by his commanders, it is said the Emperor silenced them and replied, "They shall not fail me. They will return from the fire, thus it shall ever be." Almost 4/5 of the 18th Legion task force survived the journey to their objective. Once again, this comes back to untested machines.
Yes.
The rest being destroyed by the plethora of environmental hazards. Those who breached the carborundum-lined caverns of the Caucasus Tempest Galleries found a strange, imprisoned world unlike anything the expeditions of the Great Crusade would find among the stars. Huge spindle machines turned over caged seas of molten metal drawn from the planet's core, spewing forth crowns of blinding lightning, while suspended on silicate webs across which unfathomable and inhuman machines scuttled like spiders. In the airless furnace beyond mortal endurance, the legionnaires of the 18th found no warrior of the Ethnarch to contest them, for nothing human had set foot in this hell for millennia. but rather the defenders of these sleepless engines were fire-blackened service automatas, reacting to the outsiders' threat. Incredibly strong and built to withstand the ravages of the firestorm that surrounded them, each would have overmatched even the battle automata of the Mechanicums Legio Cybernetica in size and power, being products as they were of mankind's ancient and technologically advanced past. There were thousands of these Tempest automata, and all turned on the Astartes of the 18th Legion in an implacable and unceasing attack. Neither plasma nor melta weapons could breach their armor, while bolter shells rippled across them like rain. Only massive kinetic force applied at close range against their articulated joints was able to disable them, a lesson that cost the 18th hundreds of lives to learn.
Good thing they got those hammers.
The 18th held out with a mixture of stoic resilience and suicidal fury, maintaining discipline and order despite the onslaught, while individual legionnaires hurled themselves willingly to their deaths to grapple with the killing machines so that they might be destroyed and their brothers' lives saved. Soon, something like a stalemate had been achieved, but at a terrible cost, for less than a third of the 18th Legion's original numbers remained. And despite the body of the vast enemy system being badly wounded, a mortal blow had not been struck. In the inaccessible depths, the ancient, implacable machine spirit that bound the Tempest Galleries together was starting to manufacture fresh robotic soldiers for its cause. And that was something that the legionnaires of the 18th could not match.
Seems like the Salamanders are done for, if that machine really got up and running.
Yes, it would. But the Legion devised a two-pronged assault strategy. The first division would mount a series of diversionary attacks at the other locations to confuse the enemy. Once this was underway, the second, larger division would assault the power node. It was assumed that while survival was not likely for the diversionary squads, the central assault force faced certain doom, yet victory would be assured. When the assault came, the legionnaires thundered from their holdouts and defensive positions, many armed with improvised power fists, thunderhammers, shock cannons, and cutting saws fashioned from the shattered remains of the fallen Tempest automata. With them came their full reserves of munitions and manpower, for nothing could be held back. Attacked suddenly from many fronts, the inhuman intelligence which oversaw the Tempest Galleries responded with cold machine logic, efficiently dividing and dispatching its forces to deal with the threats. The fighting was savage, but the plan was working. Slowly, tortuously, the Legion fought its way to the towering power node at the center of the gallery, buying each meter of ground with dozens of lives. Eventually, they were successful, yet little more than 1,000 legionnaires of the 20,000 strong survived, and those who did were scattered across the Tempest Galleries, many conducting diversionary attacks at its fringes, while the rest rebuilt one of the damaged termite transporters for the arduous journey back to the surface. Upon the return, the Emperor himself gathered the survivors together and awarded them the laurel of victory for the campaign against the Ethnarch to be forever theirs. And their first battle honor inscribed with the motto, "In fire and darkness tested." Now, brother, I know I covered last week famous battles with Vulcan, such as the battle with the Beast and the first meeting with Vulcan. And I just recalled the assault on the Tempest Galleries. But shouldn't we be speaking of more recent events?
Indeed, Yuksen. But before we move on past the Horus Heresy, there was one battle that I thought you might enjoy, the Compliance of Caldera. Now, this was an unusual campaign of the Great Crusade that involved bringing the world of 154-4, known as Ibsen, by its inhabitants, into imperial compliance. This world had been discovered by the Iron Hands 154th Expeditionary Fleet, led by the Primarch Ferrus Manus. Upon closer inspection, the Iron Hands realized that this world was most unusual, as it was a rare example of Aldari and human coexistence. Upon further inspection, it was discovered that these humans were in fact descendants of the Salamanders' homeworld of Nocturne, who had been liberated from the Dark Eldar captivity by their craftworld kin. The Salamanders Legion, led by the Primarch Vulcan, was joined by the Death Guard and the Iron Hands Legion. The world was underdeveloped and largely inhospitable to human life, but possessed valuable mineral deposits. However, the Imperial forces faced stiff resistance for control of the planet from the Eldar, who had placed a garrison upon Epson. The Eldar forces, including Seers, Warlocks, and other combat psychers, could not have expected to defeat one legion of Astartes, let alone 3. The mystery deepened when the semi-feral primitive human tribes inhabiting the planet seemed more sympathetic to the Eldar, or at the very least, not welcoming to their human liberators. The Salamanders and the other Imperials defeated the Eldar with relative ease, as was expected. After the conquest, the Salamanders learned that the Eldar had been defending a network of mynheers, which served as psychic nodes that fed into a giant arch, where the final and most brutal confrontation between the Astartes and the Xenos had taken place. This arch itself had been located thanks to a mysterious remembrancer attached to the Salamanders, with whom Vulcan had an unsettling conversation before the battle. After the slaughter ended, Vulcan saw the remembrancer loitering by the arch and then suddenly disappeared. Following him, Vulcan and his elite pyre guard descended into the chambers beneath it, through the portal at its base. There they found a crude warding ceremony taking place, conducted by the primitive human tribal priests, who were ready to sacrifice an ancient Dark Eldar witch. Finally, Vulcan realized the truth. The arch was in reality a webway portal. Vulcan had seen a gate like this before in his Nocturian youth, when Dark Eldar repeatedly utilized such portals to raid and pillage the planet. The Eldar had taken control of the portal by defeating their dark cousins, and in the process had freed the indigenous human population of Epson from the horrors of the Dark Eldar raids. Thus, the humans saw the Eldar as saviors. Terrified by the defeat of their liberators at the hands of the Imperium, the natives had sought to sacrifice their Dark Eldar captive to ward off the inevitable return of her race. And the mysterious remembrancer, who was nowhere to be seen, had actually been the Emperor in disguise, who must have had a great interest in particulars of this mission, since he had ordered so many resources committed to it. Why? I honestly have no idea. While I may not be fond of the Emperor, he does always seem to have humanity's best interests at heart, other than his own personal gains, of course. Hopefully this had to do with pushing back the vile Dark Eldar, but more likely than not, this was about the valuable resources the planet was known for. Regardless of the Emperor's underlining plan, Vulcan ordered Epson and his irredeemable, corrupted population cleansed by flame. He renamed the scoured dead world Caldera. The world was now ready to receive new human colonists and to be exploited for the benefit of the Imperium. Now, I know, brother, this seems out of character for Vulcan. To destroy an entire civilization? But remember, Vulcan is still a servant of the Emperor, and he will do what must be done. And secondly, we must also remember that his actions still wounded his soul. When he was discovered during the time of the Beast, he was found on Caldera, and when the Empire sought out his assistance, he refused unless the Empire helped him save the planet. He vowed that he would never again let Caldera be consumed in fire. Now, before we carry on to your newer story about the Salamanders, which has nothing to do with Vulcan, by the way, what are your final thoughts on this epic tale? Or about the Tempest Galleries? I mean, honestly, the constitution of the Salamanders before they met the Primarch, I think, is actually fairly interesting. But what are your thoughts, anyways, of before and after they met the Primarch?
When it comes to before, to tell you the truth, like you mentioned when I was talking about the campaign, I'm not sure how well it was thought out on how they were going to use them to begin with.
It was almost like they were patsies. It's like, take them, they're expendable.
Yeah, I know, really.
I mean, okay, you can either look at it like that, or you can look at it that the Emperor had like undying faith in this group, which they never explain why, other than he's the Emperor, which doesn't make a lick of sense. But yeah, yeah.
As we know, the Imperium historians always have in such high regard.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. Not being an Imperium historian, I think I agree with you a little bit more on this. I think this was just like, here, take them. They're expendable, but they're tough, so they might work. And if it doesn't work,
we'll give them these experimental items.
Yep.
We'll see if they'll explode or not,
And part of me thinks, anyways,
that a sixth of them, no, it was a fifth. A fifth of them died before they even got into combat.
Yeah. And I mean, it almost is like, anyways, like, well, if this doesn't work, then we have plan B. Or it's just serious. And honestly, I think that's kind of what he was going with. Or maybe even the concept of like, well, if this doesn't work, back to the drawing board. We really didn't have any good ideas. This was the best we had. Yeah. Which sounds actually pretty terrible. But I mean, what do you think, anyways, the huge difference, anyways, between just their concept before and after they met Vulcan?
Well, I think part of it actually has to deal with the fact that Vulcan's
actually
knowledge,
a good leader.
Yeah, that plus his knowledge is basically, okay, you have somebody who's given like virtually little tactical knowledge, has next to no experience. You go, here, take control of 20,000 people, do something.
I believe the term is trial by fire, which works for the Salamanders.
Vulcan arrives. He's had years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
He's studied in great detail, not just tactics, but history and all this other stuff. So he has more knowledge and more experience, and so he can apply that more. That's one thing that definitely helps. And then through that, he also became more tempered because of the fact that he has all this experience.
Right.
And knowledge and knows how things work better.
Well, and I agree with you anyways. I definitely think
so he applies that and trains all the other people on that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think that really helped the Salamanders because instead of just being kind of tossed willy-nilly anyways wherever they were going, which is actually what happened to the Dragon Warriors after the Tempest Galleries, because there were so few of them, the Emperor was just kind of like, well, we're going to split you up in squads and just kind of send you out on more suicide missions. That'll work, right?
Well, piecemeal.
Yeah.
Oh, and we'll leave you to defend against an orc massacre.
Yeah, that's where they eventually ended up with. Yeah, it really does kind of show anyways. I think the other thing though is that the huge difference between the two is that it obviously shows anyways the Emperor did not care at all about the 18th. Vulcan did. So he used them anyways in a concept where Vulcan, I think, shows actually his leadership here, as well as his compassion anyways for his troops in this second combat with Caldera, as opposed to just tossing them out into, wherever on suicide missions. Like, how about we don't do that? I kind of like these guys. I mean, Sam and Frank have been around forever. I don't want them to just get shot by some random Alderi person.
Well, kind of like how, and we'll talk more about him later, how he personally built a dreadnought chassis for the prior Lord.
Yeah, I believe they called it the Iron Dragon.
Yeah, or the Dracos Revenant, I think.
Yes. Which I believe we will be getting into next week.
Yes.
Interesting. And I'm really looking forward to, by the way, the Iron Dragon. That, from what I've read about it, he's pretty cool. But tell me, brother, I know we talked about some stuff that happened way back when anyways. Do you have a particular campaign that you would like to talk about anyways that has to do like more recently, like in the 41st Millennium with the Salamanders?
Well, Zeckthar, I figure we'd move less away from chaos and more towards Xenos.
So who are we fighting today? Is it the orcs? Is it the Eldar? Who is it?
No, it's the bugs. Sorry, I mean
the no. All right. Well then, carry on. Well, hang on. You must be talking about the purging of the Moons of Ymgarl then.
Yes.
Okay. This is a good one.
Well, the purging Moons of Ymgarl was a xenocidal imperial military campaign. It was carried out by the Salamanders against a particularly rare strain of Tyranids known as Ymgarl gene stealers. And this took place between 754 to 756 of 41st millennium.
Just real quick, anyways, is there any difference between them and the Ymgarl gene stealers and regular gene stealers?
Well, not much other than their appearance. Their facial structure is more like lictors, other than the regular ones, which more resemble a gaunt.
So it's just their appearance?
Yes, well, no. They seem to be harder to kill and significantly faster. Also, like lictors, they were apparently great at camouflage.
Aha! So they are like a mix between a regular gene stealer and a lictor, as opposed to a gaunt.
Precisely.
Ah! And I assume the Imperium had a problem with these guys.
Yes, very much so. By the edict of the High Lords of Terra, actions against suspected gene stealer infections were stepped up. As part of this xenocidal campaign, the Salamanders were given the onerous duty of purging the gene stealers for all time from the Moons of Ymgarl. This was a realm where these foul creatures had always maintained a foothold and from which they had previously been thought to originate.
Well, that makes sense. The Salamanders have always had a penchant for flamers, and nothing ruins a Tyranid's day more than burning Prometheum.
Agreed. With the aid of the Magos biologists of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Salamanders constructed a detailed plan of attack, first rooting out their prey by using specially sanctioned alchem weapons to burn away much of the moon's atmospheres.
Jiminy Christmas! They weren't mucking around, are they? They could kill the whole atmosphere? Sorry. Sorry.
And destroying the teeming jungles, they covered them, thereby robbing their insidious enemies of sustenance and concealment before proceeding to cleanse the ancient tunnels that honeycombs the moon's surfaces. The Salamanders advanced into the darkness with re-engineered Mechanicus termites, boring craft with spider stalker servitors to scout their way forward in the lightless underworld, methodically scouring the tunnels. The origins of the Ymgarl gene stealers remain a complete mystery to the Imperial savants, for they do not seem to have been a strain of bioform created by any of the Hive fleets already known to have invaded Imperial space.
Really?
Yes, although some say they may be the last survivors of a Tyranid reconnaissance in the galaxy before the arrival of Hive Fleet Behemoth.
So what you're saying is they may have been the very first Tyranids in the Milky Way system?
From what I have gathered, yes, they probably are.
Interesting.
In fact, Tyranid gene stealers were first encountered on the moons of Ymgarl in approximately 500.M41, before the invasion by the Tyranid Hive Fleet Behemoth in 745.M41. They were the first gene stealers encountered by the forces of the Imperium of Man, and were initially thought to be a new species of previously unknown intelligent Xenos. It was later discovered that they were just one variant of the standard gene stealers, deployed as a servant bioform of the Tyranid Hive fleets.
Just real quick, I got a question for you. Do you think that a lot of the aliens that the Empire of Man have found have really just been like different forms of Tyranids? Especially the ones that are more bug related, but they're just kind of like, they just didn't know what Tyranids were before then. I'm thinking more like farther back, like for instance with the Horus Heresy, there's a particular part where the lunar wolves attack this one particular planet that's like covered with these like bug like Xenos with like giant like saber like hands. To me, anyways, the more that I read about it, I'm like, these sound like Tyranids, but they never actually claim that they are Tyranids. They give them a different name, and for the life of me, I can't remember what they're called. But do you think, anyways, that it wasn't until they actually the Hive fleet showed up that they might have actually? So what I'm asking, I guess, is that do you think that these gene stealers were actually the very first, or do you think that it was just the one that was probably closest to when the Hive fleet started showing up, especially Behemoth?
Well, for most tactics, the way the Tyranids act is they send generally, like, for example, gene stealers first.
Right.
And one of the reasons why always pretty much the Imperium tries to go after gene stealer places is because what they do basically is they end up infiltrating a planet and then slowly end up taking over it.
Not only that, but if I recall right, they also send out beacons anyways for actual Tyranid hive
Yeah.
fleets, right?
Right. So in the case that you're talking about, it sounds like unless it was a hive fleet that nobody knew about that had already taken over that area and somehow disappeared and left those things there.
It sounded like, yeah, it's well, okay. So there's a little bit more to that story. It turns out, anyways, that this was like an alien race that was attacking these humans that hadn't met the Imperium yet, and their technology was advanced enough they didn't feel like killing them off completely, so they just stuck them all on one planet. I know it seems really obtuse, especially for the Imperium, but or humans, but yeah,
Yeah, that doesn't really fit with Tyranids since Tyranids have all of their weapons are bio related,
right.
generally fused into their body.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Well, I mean, yeah, it was just kind of a weird thought that I had. Sorry to interrupt you. Carry on.
Still, with utmost resolve, the salamanders battled deeper and deeper into the moon, encountering vast and strange blind worm-like mutations crashing through the tunnels, and appallingly powerful brood lords whose talons hands could shred a Terminator with a single stroke. The losses among the Space Marines quickly mounted, but assaults from the Nightmare Gene Stealers were dispatched in a storm of fire, or crushed under the shattering blows of thunder hammers. And the Salamanders did not falter despite desperate hours and terrible reversals. Campaign lasted for nearly 2 Terran years of bloody struggle and death in the darkness before finally the Magos biologist pronounced the ancient threat on Ymgarl ended. However, its dark legacy would live on in the shadows of chilled ship holds, dark space hulks, and doomed worlds uncounted.
And what of the salamanders?
Well, they did their duty and exterminated those gene stealers on the moons, but were not informed of the ones that escaped. It wasn't until many years later that they found out about it, and most salamanders itch for the chance to redouble their efforts to hunt down the strange gene stealers and eradicate them from the universe. Now, what do you think these campaigns demonstrate about Salamander's character and tactics in battle?
Honestly, I think this kind of shows their same. It shows, anyway, something that is very interesting to the salamanders. Just a straight up sturdy resolve, stubbornness, even. They don't retreat. They don't back away from like suicidal problems or survival rates, anyways, that are low. You send the salamanders, and even though most of them will probably end up dying, they'll still win. And that's kind of what I gather, anyways, from the salamanders here. They are. I still think that the Imperium actually kind of uses them still as expendable forces, which is too bad. But because of their tenacity, they continue to survive, and they become actually one of the cooler, I think, Astartes of any of the groups. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it does show that they're resolved, definitely. And it seems like they also are sent into these situations. Mind you, they never have. Well, we'll get more into this later, but they're always not really following the original codex because they don't have
The numbers.
as many.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the few times, anyways, that Vulcan actually, I mean, Vulcan rebuked Rabute Gilliman's concept of the Codex Astartes. He just said, "Yeah, no, this doesn't work." And he was able to, and honestly, he was one of the few chapters. It seems like we've only talked about chapters, anyways, that just looked at Rabute Gilliman and said, "You're crazy. We're not doing that." Tune in next time when we talk about the Imperial Fists. I think they're the last chapter that said, "No, we're not doing that." Right?
Um,
I mean, there were
well,
three, I thought.
they kind of ended up following it, actually, except for one of their successor chapters doesn't.
Ah. Well,
One of the most favored ones that we like.
yeah, the Space Wolves. Yeah, they just
No,
said
the
no.
Black Templars, who I'm talking about.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, I keep forgetting they're actually part of the Imperial Fist, which is
They're one of
weird
the successor chapters.
because I like the Imperial Fist. I like Rogel Dorn. He's actually kind of a really cool character. But then to create something as god awful as the Black Templars, it's just. I wish Rogel Dorn could come back from the warp, grab his hand, and just slap the crap out of the chapter master of the Black Templar. That's just all I want to see.
Not chapter master. He's called something else.
Oh crap! Another one like that.
But I see we have some extra time. Perhaps we delve into an old classic, some notable salamanders.
I'm glad you asked. Now, today we're going to talk about the most recent Forge Father, Vulcan Heston. He is an interesting breed of salamander, and through notable feats on the battlefield, as well as his infallible character, he claimed the venerable title of Forge Father.
I find it ironic that the Forge Father would have the Primarch's name. It almost seems destined.
Ah, yes. Well, it's actually more of an honor name. Every Forge Father's name is Vulcan.
Oh, I see. That makes more sense. I had found in one of my books that Trazine had killed Vulcan. Yet, in other books, he is still alive.
Yes, and we'll get to our good friend Trazine in a moment. He actually has tussled with the Forge Father a time or two, and I would be remiss if I didn't explain. But first, let me explain what the Forge Father actually is. It is a great honor for any salamander to be chosen as Forge Father, for the title is only given to the most heroic exemplar of the chapter. To be so named, the Space Marine in question must be a great warrior, skilled in battle. But this alone is not enough. The Forge Father must excel in the qualities that the salamanders themselves esteem most highly: self-reliance, fierce loyalty, sacrifice, and uncompromising determination, along with tenacity. No matter the odds, Salamander does not relent. These are the hallmarks of the chapter, and have been since the days when their Primarch first walked amongst them. The Forge Father is often chosen from a leadership position, typically, but not always, one of the captains of the companies. Upon becoming Forge Father, the individual renounces his old position, title, and name, and takes on a new role in the name of Vulcan. It is the Forge Father's task to seek out and find the artifacts left by the Primarch, 5 of which have already been found. It is his role to sacrifice the solace of brotherhood for the life lived mostly in solitude and duties yet more perilous. At the end of the 41st millennium, Vulcan Heston is now named Forge Father. Since his earliest days as a scout marine, Heston has been a much noted warrior. He alone, as a recruit, killed a unique beast. For his mantle, he slew a mottled Trihorn, amongst the most vicious and cunning of the reptilian breed. Even teams of veteran drake hunters might struggle to accomplish such a deed. Heston's skills as a smith, working his hammer upon the anvil, were such that master artificers stopped over his work and admired them. The sentiment was expressed in a number of ways, but all amounted to the same. Truly did the blood of Vulcan himself run in this novice. Now, if you're wondering how salamanders are chosen, don't worry. We will discuss this next week when we get more into the homeworld of Nocturne. Now, where was I?
Heston as a recruit?
Oh yes. Thank you, Yuksen. Well, Heston grew quickly through the ranks, and it wasn't long before he was given the title of Commander of the Fourth Company. For the next century, Heston served with notable distinction until it was clear to the council that he was destined for more. It was then that the Pantheon Council commanded him to set down his burdens as commander of the Fourth Company and don the mantle of Forge Father. In solemn prescribed ceremony, Heston relinquished his old titles and duties and emerged out of the same flames and in the same manner as their Primarch, Vulcan. He would follow Vulcan's trail, searching for details of the Primarch's lone ventures about the galaxy and for clues about the hidden relics. It would be an isolated existence, as cut off from others as Nocturne had been from the rest of humanity. As Forge Father, Histon would maintain his seat upon the chapter's ruling Pantheon Council. However, his post would ensure that he was an irregular attendant at best, for his travels were to be long and perilous. In the pursuit of his quest, Histon has walked a crooked and winding path across the galaxy. He has been guided from system to system by clues inked within the Tomb of Fire. These are the most holy texts that the Salamanders Primarch left behind before his last and final disappearance. In them are words of wisdom and guidance for his sons, but there is more besides. Within those many volumes, secrets were revealed. Prophecies, clues, and references were left for the wise to decipher. For the Salamanders know, as their Primarch taught, that the forged blade must be tested and retested, as the strongest metals are folded in upon themselves over and over and over again, until at last they find their utmost strength. So did Vulcan leave behind the answers, buried in hidden sigils, disguised as not yet deciphered code. Although alone, detached from the Salamander's chain of command, the Forge Father can call upon his battle brothers as needed and direct their actions to aid in securing any clues. To the rest of the chapter, even those who knew him previously, the Forge Father has become a figure of legend and utmost respect. In Histon, they see reflected aspects of their Primarch himself, for the Forge Father follows his footsteps and carries about him artifacts forged by Vulcan's own hands. Indeed, amongst Histon's gear is equipment borne to battle by Vulcan during the Primarch's days, fighting beside the Emperor at the birth of the Imperium. Now, I could bore you with many of the travels of Histon, yet I wish to tie this all together with some of our other voxes.
Be honest, Zeckthar. You wish only to talk about Histon because he dueled your favorite character, Trazine the Infinite.
You know me too well, brother. Of course I want to try to plug in Trazine wherever I can. I still say we need to go on a short expedition to the tomb world of Salmas and discuss history with the Necron Overlord.
We've talked about this. First off, the Creator has a problem with us interacting with the populace of the Milky Way. And secondly, poor guy's mind would either hemorrhage and we would leave him comatose, or he would take us as villains and we would have to kill him. You remember the last time we tried to make contact with a citizen of the galaxy?
Yes, I remember. Poor Sven Gortog. He showed such promise. But I believe that Trazine would have a much better understanding of this. Or us. After all, he has been around significantly longer and is a true historian.
You're talking about Histon?
Yes. Well, before I get into Trazine, I must explain Histon's role with the 9 artifacts of Vulcan. Now, at the start of the 42nd millennium, 5 of the 9 hidden artifacts of Vulcan have been recovered, 3 of which are personally borne by Vulcan Histon. The Forge Father is protected by Casare's mantle, the legendary scaled cloak taken from the skin of a drake slain by the Primarch himself. In his right hand, he carries the Spear of Vulcan, a weapon forged by Vulcan himself. Its incandescent blade so powerful it can even set ceramite ablaze. Histon's other hand is encased with the Gauntlet of the Forge, a mailed fist cunningly wrought to summon fire at need. This is the one artifact that Histon is most proud of, for he himself recovered it. The tale of how he took it from an Eldar Corsair, Lord Iath Bloodweaver, after defeating his war host in battle is just one of the dozens that are now told about Histon, because he dons these weapons. Trazine the Infinite has taken a particular interest in the Forge Father, for he carries one-of-a-kind artifacts that he wishes to put in his museum.
He's a thief, Zeckthar. He simply wants to steal these artifacts for his personal treasure trove.
No! He wishes to put them in his museum, so later generations can view them and enjoy.
What later generations? Those that enter his museum are normally killed or added to the museum.
Regardless. Twice now, the Necron Overlord Trazine the Infinite has instigated attacks upon Histon. The Necron artifact collector attempted to wrest the Spear of Vulcan from Histon's hands for the first time in 878.M41, but was defeated in personal combat by the Forge Father. Indeed, it is widely guessed that Trazeen was behind the demise of several Forge Fathers in the past, although this has never really been proven. Later on, Trazeen claimed to discover the Song of Entropy, one of the missing artifacts of Vulcan, instigating a decade-long war between the Salamanders and the Necron forces of the tomb world of Salmus. Trazeen's claim proved to be a lie to lure Histon into a trap during the assault of Tekron, where the Necron once again attempted to slay the Forge Father and acquire the Spear of Vulcan. The Salamander's 6th Company fought back-to-back, bolters and flamers defiantly blazing away at the surrounding Necrons. 40 battle brothers fell during the fighting, but at the end of the day, Histon defeats Trazeen once again, and the Salamanders stand knee-deep in broken Necron bodies.
Yes, brother. This sounds like a humble historian only looking out for the artifacts of the galaxy.
Well, I didn't see you complaining when we claimed the Song of Entropy.
Well, that's all we have for today. Join us next week when we discuss the world of Nocturne, how to become a Salamander, as well as a couple more great characters from the elite Astartes from the death planet of Nocturne.
Yep. Join us next week. But in the meantime, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, or follow us. And as always...
Wait, what about the website?
Oh, quite right, Yuksen. How could I forget? If you have any questions about the Necrons, Space Wolves, or Salamanders, feel free to ask us in the comments on our website at www.asharaka.com.
That's right. Just go to www.asharaka.com.
Yes. And as always, this is Zeckthar.
And Yuksen, signing off.